to be in big trouble as a Christian. So let me begin by giving you what I think are inadequate answers. Let's start with what I believe is inadequate of an answer for this, okay? First would be atheism, which you'd be happy to dismiss. But the atheist tries to deal with the problem of suffering of evil by denying the existence of God. So all that happens in this life, says the atheist, the good and the bad, well, that's just the result of time and chance and one atom bouncing off another. Okay? So no rational person, and you'll hear them talk a lot about what's rational, okay? No rational person will feel any outrage over evils because such evils don't really exist. I read this past week a column by Richard Dawkins on the subject of the problem of evil. And the whole column, 90% of this thing was just absolutely riddling Christians and telling everybody how stupid they were, and yet he gives no answer. I felt this really frustrating, and I see this a lot with what he writes. He's more about what he's against than what he's for. And so the atheist resolves the problem of evil by saying, there is no problem. Then there's deism. This is another answer, deism. The deist thinks about God as the creator who sets this universe going, establishes all of its laws and all of its order, and then, see ya, lets it go its own way, okay? The picture's often given of the watchmaker who crafts this beautiful timepiece, winds it up, sells it, and then after that has no interest in it. That's the deist's God, okay? He's too big to be bothered about little problems like suffering on the human planet or our conception of what is evil, all right? There's a third answer, which is very popular in churches today, which I want to warn you about. It's called open theism. Open theism. Now, most of you will be familiar with Arminian theology, okay? And if you don't, just go on Wikipedia and I'll give you a quick, short answer afterwards. But Arminians historically have offered a theodicy, and a theodicy is an explanation for the problem of evil, okay? They've offered that, and they call it free will defense, all right? And it goes like this. If you pose the dilemma to the Arminian, is God sovereign and good? And the Arminian would say, yes, God is sovereign and good. And then if you ask him, does God, this sovereign God, ordain evil? They would say, no. No. God does not ordain evil things. He leaves the choices of his creatures, of humans, to themselves. He knows what they will choose. He knows what they're going to decide to do, but he himself does not ordain that. Therefore, he's not responsible for evil. This is classic Arminianism. God cannot be charged with evil because evil is the result of unhindered choices of moral free agents, okay? The little problems that come up with Arminian theology, one is philosophers have really dived on this one, shredded this argument by noting that if the future is already foreknown by God, if he already knows what people are going to choose, then it is by necessity settled. There is a future, and God knows what it is. For example, if God knows that Judas is going to betray Christ, okay, he knows that ahead of time, then that means that event is settled in the future, and he does nothing to intervene. Then God's culpable. God's culpable for it. All right? So, in answer to Arminianism, along comes open theism. And open theists say God doesn't know the future, at least not all of it. He knows some of it. He's chosen to limit his knowledge of the future so as to protect human freedom. He can't know the free decisions of human beings before those decisions occur, otherwise it wouldn't be truly freedom. This is the argument. In other words, they say God takes our freedom to be so valuable, he's willing to pay the price of there being all kinds of suffering in this world that's caused by the misuse of it. Okay? And then they point to a number of scriptures to back their view, where it seems that God changes his mind on certain things. They get most of this from the Old Testament. Regrets his actions, gets frustrated, is surprised, and repents. The open theists, I tell you, they're intent on doing two things. One, they want to clear God's name from evil. They don't want anything evil associated with God. They want to clear him from that. And then secondly, they want to maintain and defend human will, free will. Right? But the cost of this endeavor is enormous. Enormous. It's catastrophic. Because we are left with a God who's bound by time, reactive. He's surprised. Oops, got to change direction here. Oh, got to change direction here. And worst of all, is not in control. So by placing so much emphasis on free will, you see, we're left with a God who's given control of the universe over to, guess who? You. And worse, Satan. Open theists hope their view will be more acceptable to the postmodern world. But it's not. They laugh at it. So where does this leave us? These three arguments are completely inadequate. You know, we're left with the only thing we can really trust in, ultimately rely on, and that's God's self-revelation. God's self-revelation. I used the word scriptures in the Bible, and I took that away because that's unfair, because that would make out what I'm about to say as being totally correct and everything else as being completely wrong. And even although I'm quite convinced those rest of those viewpoints are wrong, what I want you to understand is what we must depend on is God's revelation of himself in these matters, not what we think God is doing in these things. What does God say about this? How does he give his defense? Because as soon as man tries to defend God, they mess it up. They make a horrible hash of it. So I want to take you this morning to a number of scriptures, and we're going to let God speak for himself. And this will not solve all your problems. And it may provide you with answers you might not really want to hear, but I do think they're answers that you need today. Okay, let's start in the book of Hebrews.